So welcome everybody to session 1B. I am Professor Charlotte Thomas. I teach at Mercer University, and I'm also the Executive Director of ACTC. So on behalf of ACTC, thank you very, very much for submitting your work for this conference and for being here. I think that T.S. Eliot knew something about the academic calendar when he said April is the cruelest month. It's a tough time, and we appreciate very much your interest in being in conversation with us and with folks from all over the world. So we have a slightly shorter panel here today than originally was listed. Robert Musil had to, unfortunately, he had to withdraw from the conference. So we have Miriam Saleh and Maximilian Waldron, our two presenters today. But let's just take a second. Let's leave them till last, just because we'll be handing things over to Miriam first. So the first should be last, but let's take just a minute to introduce yourselves and where you're from. The last session was so busy, and so I think just to hasten that along and avoid awkward silences, I'll just call on you. So just tell us, who you are, where you're coming from, what you're studying, and maybe what you're going to be, what your paper will be on. And so we can look forward to seeing you in your session. So Abdullah, please, would you go first and introduce yourself?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So my name's Abdullah. I go to the University of Colorado Boulder. So in Colorado Boulder, I do aerospace engineering. Not very typical for this conference, I think. But yeah, my paper, this next session is going to be about Genesis and the stories of Cain and Abraham. And I'm really excited for this session. So
I love it when people with practical degrees show up in my classes. It's a good thing. And not that the liberal arts aren't practical, but you know what I mean. You can build bridges and read about Genesis. I'm a fan. Alicia.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm just trying to set on my Echo Dot for my speaker because it seems to be working. Okay, good. So my name is Alicia. I'm at Vancouver Island University in Canada on the West Coast, so I get to wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Yay! I'm in my third year. I'm a mature student, so I'm 28. I'm studying sociology and liberal studies, and I'm writing on Job. And that's why I picked this panel, because I was trying to get a sneak peek at the other Job, but they're not here, so that's okay. I'm still excited.
Thanks. Angelo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angelo. I'm a senior at St. John's College in New Mexico. So I'm currently in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I've written on the Magic Mountain, on what it means to be heroically ordinary.
I had a 50-50 chance on your name there, Angelo. I'm sorry about that.
You're doing great.
All right, Chandler.
Hi, I'm Chandler. I'm from St. Thomas University, and I'm studying great books and psychology. Normally, I would be on campus in Fredericton, but in light of the pandemic, I've been studying remotely from my home in Western Prince Edward Island, Canada. So, and my paper's on Jonathan Swift in light of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Fantastic. Let's see. I think. Okay, so Maximilian and then Miriam, will go straight into your paper after that. So Maximilian.
So I'm Maximilian Waldron. I am a student at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm currently a freshman, and I'm my current major, I'm planning to be a business major. The topic I wrote my paper on was, my task was to apply some ancient Greek works we had read and the wisdom that those would provide to a modern political leader.
Great, thanks, Maximilian. All right, Miriam, please introduce yourself and then go ahead and begin your paper.
First, do you want me to share the screen? for the paper, or?
That's up to you. If you think it would be helpful, I think it's fine.
Okay. So I'm Miriam Saleh. I'm from the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma. I'm coming at you from home right now, which is also Tulsa. And I'm a biochemistry major, a junior, pre-med, and an English minor. And I'm a massive nerd, so liberal arts like buff. So I'm in the honors program, and that's how I heard about this. And I was like, yes, okay, here we go. And yeah, I love reading the classics, and I love reading like all sorts of really old stuff. So I'm like, I'm really excited for this. Okay, well, let's see. Let me share my screen because I think that will help. I won't be able to see everyone, but I probably wouldn't have been able to see you anyway, considering I'll be reading. Okay, here we go. Can everyone see it? All right, awesome. Okay, and as you can see, my paper is on the Iliad and sort of connections between what I saw in the Iliad and what I'm seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic. So, at first glance, war and pandemic seem fairly unrelated. War concerns itself with conflict between two or more groups, while a pandemic is a mass disease threat that often infects thousands, even millions of people. However, the reactions of people and societies to the COVID-19 pandemic are oddly similar to the ideas about war in the Iliad. Translator Robert Pickles, gotta give credit. It is depicted as exhausting, catastrophic, and heartbreaking, despite war in Greek times supposedly being honorable and noble. Dying in war equals dying as a martyr. Many aspects of the war in the Iliad can be compared to modern day societies dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, including the exhaustion, loss, and corruption. Despite the horrors of war, there is also a strength of will and love depicted in both the text and seen throughout the world during the pandemic, a resilience and strength of human spirit. Most of the Iliad takes place over a few days in the final year of the decade-long siege against the city of Troy. Initially, it seems that war is glorified. One might think so based on the lengthy passages detailing and highlighting death and gore, and the pages upon pages of casualties and methods of killing. However, when one looks again at the specific descriptions, one notices that rather than war being glorified, it is instead normalized. An example of this is one of Homer's similes. Agamemnon killed Pisander on the ground, slashing off his arms with a sword, lopping off his head, and he sent him rolling through the carnage like a log. This comparison is dehumanizing and shows that someone being killed at this point in the war is common. It is more like knocking down a domino than taking the life of a living, breathing, sentient being. This kind of simile in the attitude it entails is driven home using lines like, stampedes of massive stallions dragged their empty chariots, stallions yearning to feel their master's hands at the reins, but there they lay, sprawled across the field, craved far more by the vultures than by wives. The devastation and emptiness of war echoes from quotes such as this. It is as if these men's purpose was to die, and their loss causes a sort of hollowness on the battlefield. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has never seemed to be glorified, but the same normalization still applies. Every day, the death toll rises, and just like any other atrocious news that happens constantly, people unfortunately get used to it. This might be one of the reasons why there are so many people no longer being careful. They have forgotten just how much of a danger they are in. Moreover, in the earlier sections of the Iliad, Homer takes pains to name dozens of characters, how they fight their opponents, and who has died. Later, however, both armies swear a truce so that they can hold mass burials for their unnamed dead. They take a solemn moment to themselves to mourn their loss. Proper burial was quite important to the Greeks, but the tradition could not be upheld in the same way due to the sheer number of bodies. There is a heaviness that underlies the whole scene, even in just a paragraph, as follows. Just as the sun began to strike the lowlands, rising out of the deep, calm flow of the ocean river to climb the vaulting sky, the opposing armies met. And hard as it was to recognize each man, each body, with clear water they washed the clotted blood away and lifted them onto wagons, weeping warm tears. Priam forbade his people to wail aloud. In silence they piled the corpses on the pyre, their hearts breaking, burned them down to ash and returned to sacred Troy. And just so, on the other side, Achaean men-at-arms piled the corpses on the pyre, their hearts breaking, burned them down to ash, and returned to the hollow ships. From the description of the area they are in as being parlands, or fertile, farmable land, to the difficulty in distinguishing their dead from one another, to the weeping of warm tears as each side piles their dead onto pyres, there is a distinct devastation and exhaustion being depicted as they burn the bodies of young men that had their whole lives ahead of them, a loneliness on either side despite them both performing the same ritual. Indeed, the soldiers are isolated from their respective homes. They die alone, without their loved ones, and all their families are left with are their memories and the bones of their fathers, husbands, and brothers. Meanwhile, the gods look on, uncaring, considering only themselves as they continue to plot. Similarly, after a year of burying the dead and hearing daily about the devastation wreaked by COVID-19, there are many who are simply tired of the death, people who are tired of quarantining and isolation, like soldiers in a long war. And like the gods, there are people who pretend as if nothing is happening and continue on as if things are normal, refusing to help in protecting themselves and others by heeding guidelines from health officials. Furthermore, although there have been montages and news segments of the people who have died and with short descriptions, as the numbers mounted and continue to do so, the ability for countries to deal with the corpses was disrupted, especially when the deaths first started spiking. Mortuaries became overrun, resulting in occurrences like using military vehicles to move bodies, as well as quarantining with corpses. A few cases occurred in Italy, and mass graves, as in Brazil. The staggering amount of death is arguably due to the lack of governmental preparation. In the United States especially, certain government leaders refuse to acknowledge the seriousness of the COVID-19 threat and refuse to prepare the public for the inevitable spread of the virus to the American population. This outright lack of caring for the health of millions arguably resulted in deaths that could have been prevented. The people in power acted like gods, passing judgment and deeming the loss of human life worth it in order to save face and maintain a facade of normalcy. Further, Homeric gods are depicted in a generally negative light. Although both sides of mortals are subject to the gods' whims, these divine beings are often petty and unjust. For example, the sentiment that Ares shares when he gets injured on the battlefield is interesting in its lack of sympathy towards humans. He says, "Ah, what chilling blows we suffer, thanks to our own conflicting wills, whenever we show these mortal men some kindness." Often, the gods fall into conflict and fight each other through proxy wars by favoring certain mortal men as their champions. Here, Ares whines about the injustices the gods face when they show these mortal men's kindness. As a god, Ares is immortal and therefore is not permanently harmed by mortal wounds, which makes this sentiment all the pettier when one considers that Ares is, in the end, above the effects of the Trojan War. Similarly, government officials, particularly in American politics, have been consistently clashing over COVID-19 relief bills, testing, and vaccine plans. In the end, however, they are not the ones affected by their indecision and inefficiency. In the grand scheme of millions of people's lives, their bipartisan conflict ultimately does not matter. Instead of working to prevent hundreds of thousands of deaths, each side pushes its own agenda like gods above the masses, moving chess pieces in a game against each other, except the pieces are the lives of the American people. Just like the Homeric gods are, for the most part, untouchable by regular mortals, the pandemic will likely not severely affect the men and women of Congress. They and their families have first access to testing, vaccines, and the finest treatment should they need it. Homer presented the gods negatively, showing their temperament and vindictiveness, and although the characters are subject to the wills of their fickle gods, such is not the case for the real world. Many express that the American government can and should be also be held accountable for their policies and their lack of consideration of American lives, particularly for those of low socioeconomic status and people of color. On the other hand, despite all the agony and anguish caused by the war in the Iliad, there are moments of quiet reverence and affection, of gentle words and touches. One of these moments is shared between Hector, the great leader of the Trojan army, and his wife and son, Andromache and Scamandrius, when Hector returns to the city briefly and Andromache meets him at the wall that overlooks the city, and following in her steps, a servant holding the boy against her breast, in the first flush of life, only a baby, Hector's son, the darling of his eyes and radiant as a star. Hector would always call the boy Scamandrius. Townsmen called him Astyanax, lord of the city, since Hector was the lone defense of Troy. The great man of war breaking into a broad smile, his gaze fixed on his son in silence. Andromache worries over Hector and he reassures her, carrying an intelligent conversation with her about what is happening and their concerns for their city. When Hector, dressed in his armor, reached down for his son, but the boy recoiled, cringing against his nurse's full breast, screaming out at the sight of his own father, terrified by the flashing bronze, the horsehair crest, the great ridge of the helmet nodding, bristling terror, so it struck his eyes. And his loving father laughed, his mother laughed as well, and glorious Hector, quickly lifting the helmet from his head, set it down on the ground, fiery in the sunlight, and raising his son, he kissed him, tossed him in his arms, lifting a prayer to Zeus and the other deathless gods. Zeus, all you mortals, grant this boy, my son, may be like me, first in glory among the Trojans, strong and brave like me, and rule all Troy in power, and one day let them say, he is a better man than his father. When he comes home from battle bearing the bloody gear of the mortal enemy he has killed in war, a joy to his mother's heart. So Hector prayed and placed his son in the arms of his loving wife. Andromache pressed the child to her scented breast, smiling through her tears. This passage, set against the backdrop of war, is simple and quiet. Plot-wise, there's no reason for it to exist. Rather, it serves to humanize Hector and show his motivations, softening his character and depicting him as a loving father and husband. Andromache and Hector derive a sweet joy in this moment with their child. Hector, a man widely considered to be fierce in battle and unyielding as a pillar of stone, is felled by the side of his son. Similarly, people living in a world affected by COVID-19 have found moments to sustain themselves through the darkness, whether it is baking sourdough bread, singing sea shanties, playing music from their balconies, or even laughing at a ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal. There is a strong solidarity exhibited between many as they share tips for making masks, exchange recipes to make during quarantine, and donate money and resources to those most affected. All in all, although the Iliad is a work of fiction and COVID-19 is something that is happening to the world at large, there are many parallels to be drawn between the weariness, pain, and fear exhibited in this epic and the quarantine fatigue, suffering, and aloneness in the world today. One can see how fiction reflects reality, even if that fiction happens to be a couple of millennia old. There is solace to be found in how human love and strength can carry us through the chaos of life. The small moments where people act in the way that only people can is true across time. The human experience is universal, whether fact or fiction. There we go.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to the next paper and have one conversation / Q&A at the end. And conversation is the goal, although I know that can be challenging on Zoom. So, but Maximilian, would you please share your paper with us? And it's fine if you want to share your screen, and it's fine if you don't. It's really your choice.
Can everyone see my screen? Okay. So as I mentioned in my introduction, my task for this assignment was to analyze the wisdom offered in ancient Greek texts and how they could apply to a modern political leader. In particular, the question was regarding the President of the United States. The title of this paper was Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Greek Thought. I did that because you choose that very common saying, either whether it be Locke's Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Property, or Jefferson's Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. Particularly if we're focusing on the United States, it's a mantra that's well known in the American cultural mindset. The President of the United States must lead a modern democratic society and yet function within a clearly defined hierarchical order. Ancient Greek texts can offer wisdom to assist in striking this balance by posing 3 questions any modern political leader must consider. Just because a leader can control the population, should they do so? At what point does criticism of the government become treasonous? At what point is a leader's reputation so damaged that it is best for them to step away? Fortunately, answers to these questions date back 2.5 millennia to the times of ancient Greece. From Sophocles' Antigone, a leader can learn about the balance between criticism and treason, tyranny and wise rule. From Plato's Allegory of the Cave, a leader can learn about the dangers of living a life in the short term and manipulating the shadows on the wall. From Plato's Apology, a leader can learn about when to admit defeat in the court of public opinion. In the wake of the modern world, ushered in by the terrorist attacks of 9/11, these questions have never been more important. Written in the 370s BCE, Allegory of the Cave, a part of Plato's Republic, describes a cave in which 3 people are imprisoned. The only reality the prisoners know is the one that they are presented with, shadows on the wall. Primarily being a praise of education, Allegory of the Cave can offer greater advice to a modern political leader than just education. The Allegory of the Cave is more relevant now than ever before. Since 9/11, the use of the internet has skyrocketed to the point where it has become one of the most dominant facets of modern life. In a world where people rely heavily on the internet and often take what they read at face value, the need for the responsibility surrounding information and its control have never been greater. In the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the United States implemented far-reaching legislation to prevent the recurrence of such an act. The Patriot Act is designed to protect the American people through increased anti-terrorism powers and actions. These powers include, but were not limited to, the ability to punish terrorist activity more severely, the collection of vast amounts of data without warrants, and communication between federal agencies about collected data. Although proclaimed necessary and important by the federal government, a scandal emerged about the Patriot Act in June 2013 when National Security Agency documents were leaked by whistleblower Edward Snowden. This leak exposed the true extent of the Patriot Act and the lengths the government could go to acquire information of any variety. Tens of millions of Americans had their private phone conversations and other information searched and collected. The Patriot Act by no means impacted only Americans, as the program had spied heavily on both domestic and international groups. This expanded role of governmental oversight impacts the question of whether the government should attempt to control its people merely because it can. The answer is no. A healthy society requires rational individual thought rather than homogeneous unity. Prominent and influential political figures, such as the US president, should take heed. When does criticism become treasonous? Are beliefs worth dying for? What is the nature of tyranny? These are three questions tackled by Sophocles in his play Antigone. The story focuses on the titular character, Antigone, and her stalwart stance for her beliefs as she clashes with her uncle, Creon, the newly appointed ruler of Thebes. The story has much to say about the way belief can impact decision-making. Most importantly, it shows the struggle against a ruler whose fear and paranoia have risen to the point where even good faith criticism is considered tyranny, and his citizens fear death for the slightest missteps. In Antigone, Sophocles sets up a conflict between ruler and ruled. Creon in the story is blatantly an autocratic tyrant. He threatens everyone who disagrees with death. He disrespects the culture of the people he rules, and his paranoia manufactures treason from good faith criticism. What the President of the United States should take away from Antigone is the nature of ruling benevolently. One look into 20th century history can show the damage paranoia can do and the need to respect the cultural and religious beliefs of a population. In the 1950s, paranoia reigned supreme during the Red Scare. Fear of subversive communist influence in the United States led to the rise of kangaroo courts and Senate investigations under the authority of Senator McCarthy. This paranoia spared no one and fostered a national climate of anger, fear, and suspicion. Respecting citizens' cultural beliefs and avoiding paranoia is only half the equation. Antigone also teaches when and how criticism is justified and when and how action is required. Discussion and disagreement are cornerstones of modern democratic societies. Free speech and freedom of expression are rights often taken for granted in the US. Much like Creon, the president shouldn't wait until the repercussions begin to appear to change their minds. At times, a leader's reputation is so damaged that their effectiveness is compromised. In Apology, Plato describes the trial of Socrates in Athens. The trial, while a serious matter to the city, seems trivial to Socrates. He treats the trial as a farce, openly mocking his accusers and boasting about his divine knowledge. This brash refusal to realize the consequences of the trial led to the eventual death sentence for Socrates. A modern US president can learn something important from the account of the trial of an ancient Greek philosopher, humility. This will help a leader understand when their reputation is so damaged that it is time to step down. Socrates' trial was judged by the men of the city, the true public group of the time. Today, with the internet, anyone's opinion can spread rapidly and steamroll into an all-around storm. This modern court of public opinion is quite often what determines the culpability of any prominent figure. Many careers have been ruined by a tainted reputation. A good reputation takes years or even decades to properly build, but in one moment can crumble to dust. Whether one's reputation is destroyed through truth or outright lies, it is highly unlikely that the blemish will ever be removed. Apology demonstrates the many opportunities Socrates had to swallow his pride and live, yet his continued insistence on his reputation and defiance of the system led to his death. Any US president should be wary of situations like this. The presidency of Richard Nixon is an example. The Watergate scandal forever tainted Nixon's reputation and destroyed public opinion of the 37th president. When the name Nixon is mentioned, the first thought is often Watergate. Nixon's resignation from office in 1974 potentially spared his reputation from further damage, which likely would have occurred if he had clung steadfastly to office, as Socrates stood upon his principles. In the modern age, where information can spread in seconds, reputations have never been at greater risk. Apology shows the risks of pride and the consequences of refusing to accept defeat. These are poignant lessons for any politician. These three ancient Greek texts, Apology, Allegory of the Cave, and Antigone, still retain value and continue to share their knowledge 2.5 millennia after their publication. As long as there are people in positions of power, questions about controlling a population, balancing criticism so it doesn't become treasonous, and identifying when a reputation is so far gone that it is best to step down will forever be on the minds of rulers. Fortunately, they can look to ancient Greece for answers.
Thanks, Maximilian. Very good. All right, we have a lot of time, and we needn't fill it. We can talk as long as we want to talk, and give ourselves a break when we're ready to marshal our energies for later. But I do want to give these two excellent papers a chance to sort of breathe in conversation. So I will, it's a small enough group. I'm going to try a hands-off approach. If we end up talking on top of each other, I'll jump in. But please do leave yourself muted unless you're speaking, but please feel free to unmute yourself, and we'll just see if we can simulate just an open discussion on Zoom. We'll see how it goes. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll say thank you to both Maximilian and Miriam for the two wonderful papers. So very interesting.
I can, yeah, go
I had a
ahead, please,
question.
Angelo. Yeah, do
Sorry.
it. Good. No, good.
Yeah, my internet is kind of being sloppy right now, and I didn't totally hear everything you were saying. But yeah, one question I had, and I want to sort of bridge these two papers together somehow. Maximilian was talking about how education can crumble in an instant because of the sort of, I don't know, the power that social media has. But then I think of that in conjunction to the Iliad, and I think of Achilles, really, one who it has all this glory, and then he decides to almost revoke his reputation and say, screw this war, I'm not going to partake in it. And but there's something strange, like what is it about Achilles? His reputation doesn't go into shambles. Instead, he in the background for a while. And then he comes out in one of the most glorious pictures that we have. What is happening there?
Okay. So honestly, I don't very much like Achilles. I won't lie. I thought he was okay. I prefer Hector, my opinion, but Achilles is intriguing. I'll say that. I may not like him very much, but he's very intriguing. So I think that for him, he was able to kind of get away with what he did because of the fact that he was already so, famous for his prowess on the battlefield. And I think that in the beginning, he refuses to fight because he has this personal issue with Agamemnon, who is leading the Achaeans. And so he refuses to fight. And then his companion, Patroclus, begs him to, essentially. And Patroclus goes out and he fights and he dies, right? He's killed by Hector. And Achilles becomes so angry that Patroclus has died in war that he goes out and he starts fighting. And I think there is a nobility there in going out to avenge your friend, for him to undertake that task. And so I think that, and there was also this, kind of prophecy where he could either live a long life and, die sort of not famous at all, or he could, die in this blaze of glory when he, as a young man, but, be renowned forever. And so I think he did end up choosing the latter. And so I think that although he did not really go about in doing what he did in the best way, because I think that it was kind of fair that Patroclus died in war. It's war, so Patroclus died. But he tried to take such revenge on Hector to the point of desecrating his body and dragging it around, trying to tear it apart and let it be ravaged by vultures and birds, despite Hector begging before he died to be taken back to Troy to be buried with honor. And so I think that for me, that's the thing that gets me about Achilles, that bothers me so much about him, the fact that he was willing to do this. But he does have, I think, this moment of redemption at the end where he feels some kind of remorse. So I think that is a lot of what kind of makes him go down in history. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in too, because I find this question really, and your response to it both really interesting. Because you're right, Angela. I mean, the things that Achilles does, especially early on, are by the conventions of the epic, shameful, and yet they're not shameful within the epic when Achilles does them. And so that's a striking thing. And I do think we can, because you're trying to bridge this to Maximilian's paper, and I think I can kind of add a span to that bridge maybe, because Agamemnon's terrible. He's just terrible in so many ways, and let's just stipulate that. But he is in a bit of a bind, to be in charge of this army. And he's not the one whose wife was stolen. That's his brother. And he's not the one who can give the best speeches. That's Odysseus. And he's not the one that has the best, the most wisdom, drawing on the past. That's Nestor. And he's not the one that's best in battle. That's Achilles. I mean, he's really not good at anything, Agamemnon. But he's not, he's better than like probably 90% of the population. But when you're surrounded by heroes, he doesn't look good in comparison really to any of them. And yet he's supposed to have power. And I do think this is a kind of, this is what I mean by like helping with this bridge to Maximilian's paper, because there is in the ancient world and in the contemporary world, this sort of tension, I guess, between what you need to do to have power and then what one expects you to do with power. And maybe in between the two is how you maintain power. And so at the beginning of the Iliad, the plague is raging. Miriam's right about the things that sort of set Agamemnon and Achilles apart. But the first thing that sets them apart is that the Achaean army is dying of plague, and Agamemnon's not doing anything about it. And Achilles doesn't stay in his lane. He doesn't stay in his lane. He brings things to the assembly that should have been Agamemnon's things to bring, and but they weren't, and he wasn't, and people were dying, and he acted anyway. So how does we'd have to work some to find a contemporary analog, but I think if we kind of squint a little bit and keep it fuzzy, the contemporary analogs are real. If you feel like you are in a position of power, and in that position of power, you have responsibilities and you want to do good things with power, but you also are aware that in order to maintain power, you have to do things that you might not want to do, or that the people who have power are there because they've done things that you don't want to do. I mean, this continues to be real. So I guess just looping it back around, I'm interested in all of that. But is the reason that Achilles isn't perceived, his behavior isn't perceived as shameful because he's above those conventions somehow, that his nobility is just so palpable and obvious that the normal ways that we judge the way people make these decisions, just somehow we, on instinct, don't think they apply to him? I don't know.
I think that for me, this is my personal impression as I was reading the Iliad, that he is sort of above all of it, that people kind of allowed him some kind of leeway because he is a demigod. He is half god, half human. So I think that just as people sort of look the other way with the gods and their sort of petty conflicts and, you know, fighting for the gods, I think that it was sort of a similar thing there, to a lesser degree because he's man still, but I think that, yeah, for me it was sort of like that.
Abdullah, jump in, please.
I also think part of it is that, you know, he's really good at what he does to the point that he can just tip the scales of the war. So, you know, you really don't want to piss a guy like that off, you know, because he could help you win the war. But this is really interesting because I think, you know, begs the question of what is the highest good that, you know, people in power have, you know, or what is their highest good, or what's like their hierarchy of values, essentially, in a sense. Like, is power in a sense is an end by itself or a means to another ends? And I feel like this really boils down to the personal differences between the people at the top of like the power hierarchy and whatnot. And I know it's really complex. It's a really complex problem. Maybe I think in a sense you can look at it at the levels of the individuals, at them as just mere individuals, not just people with authority and what they care about the most and what they value the most. And, you know, that ties into the, you know, to Maximilian's and Miriam's papers, both of them, because, you know, I think at both of them you see people taking different actions because they essentially value different things, you know, and they view the world differently. And I really think that you can just look at that from a really pure individual perspective and see what each of them really think.
That's a really interesting point. That kind of just reminds me of like as I read the Iliad, you have two different people here. You have Hector and you have Achilles, and they're kind of foils of each other. They're two very different people, and they're kind of the main, you know, protectors of their individual armies, Hector with Troy and Achilles with the Achaeans. And I think that for them, their motivations were so different. But then you end up, it's like, I don't know, like you end up sort of valuing Achilles the most. Achilles is the one who goes down in history and who we all remember. But really his motivations in the beginning, from what I could see, was less like more petty. Like he had a conflict with Agamemnon, and he kind of, the way I read it was he kind of left in a huff, and he was like, he stayed for a few days in his tent and he was mad. And then, you know, he came back to join the war because of Patroclus. But I think that was a very interesting motivation to come back to avenge his loved one. But for Hector, from the get-go, he was there to lead his city and protect his city, and he was there the whole time, and he never left. And he had that moment with his wife and his son, and, you know, you could see that you know, was really the reason why he was doing it, for his wife and kid, and making sure that they never fell under the rule of the Achaeans, because he knew what would happen to his wife, he knew what would happen to his son. And, you know, there are those stories of what happened to his son later. When the Achaeans won, they threw him from a wall and killed him as an infant. And then you have Andromache being taken by the by the Achaeans as the spoil of war. So I think that's an interesting thing to bring up, these conflicting values and who it is that we end up like seeing as the hero. You know, you sort of end up seeing Achilles as the hero, but really for me, Hector was the hero. And you have that moment at the end. They have like epithets. Each character has their own epithets. And Hector, he has, you know, killer of man, or man killer. And at the end, they bring up this really interesting epithet called breaker of horses. And that's what they want you to think of at the end, because to be a horse breaker, you have to be very patient and very loyal and very, like, you know, unyielding. And I think that was interesting that they brought that up at the end, that it was, you want to remember his gentleness and sort of his like ability to unite and bring people together. That's my thing.
I just want to sort of bring though the other side of the story, because we are looking at Hector and seeing his heroism. And, you know, I mean, I think Miriam is right that Achilles is not heroic, but I honestly found him to be also one of the more like relatable, more beautiful characters in all of the Iliad, because, and namely because of the reasons why Miriam was sort of saying he was unattractive. You know, he's very petty, he's very childish, he goes into the rage. The very first words of the book are, "Sing, goddess, the anger of son of Peleus," you know, sing of Achilles' rage. And, you know, this whole book sort of goes on to just his petty rage. But I don't know, something about that childlessness was very human to me. And I thought that was a very beautiful contrast to like the godly, like these heroes and these gods. And I don't know, I liked his character because of that. And I want to know what you guys think of that humanity. Miriam also in her essay was pointing out, I think quite beautifully, the untold stories of all these humans that were in the war. And it's good that we acknowledge their humanity. But I also want to acknowledge the humanity of Achilles. And, you know, he's just angry. The war is happening because of a girl named Helen. And someone took away his prize, his toy, Briseis. And so he's angry, and he's going to say, "I don't want to play tag anymore. I don't want to be part of the war." And it is only until his love is destroyed that he I don't know, he sort of just forgoes everything. He forgoes his anger. And he allows himself to have a short life, I think not for the glory, but I think for Patroclus.
I think that is so interesting. I'll let anybody else add who wants to add, but I think that's a very good point to make. And that even if I don't like Achilles, I think that, you know, he's a very compelling character. And I think that he's very interesting because of his like push towards this more human side, the more vengeful, petty side of humans. And he definitely exhibits that. And that might be the reason why I don't like him so much, because, you know, you don't like to see those like flaws in yourself. So I think that might be it. But it's super interesting that you bring that up, because it's definitely part of what makes his character so compelling or memorable, is that he's having these like petty little like feuds, and that brings, you know, makes him so angry, and then he goes back for Patroclus. Yeah, I agree with you completely.
One of the heartbreaking things about Achilles is that he doesn't have any other life. I mean, he was the youngest of the heroes, and so he didn't have a life before it came to war. And he tries to get a life after war, but it's not going to happen for him. And so you have all of these Achaeans that have had a past, that have had families, that have children. Achilles does have a child, but it doesn't come out of a family. It's just, you know, he does have a child, but he's not raising it, and he didn't have it with someone that he's living with. And, you know, there's even bracketing for all of the conventional differences between now and then. He doesn't have a family in that sense. And then Hector is the extreme of the other end. And I'm with Miriam. I love Hector, but I also acknowledge that Hector, until near the end, until the part of the war that we get to read about in the Iliad, the setup seems to be that he's sort of punched the clock. You know, he's gone out to fight the war, and he's come home, and slept in his own bed. And his child, I mean, we're in the ninth year of a 10-year war, and he has a baby. So his life and his domestic life is embedded within his family and his culture. All of that's happening. So he's in that respect, he's just a stark contrast to Achilles, who of all of the Achaeans are distant from their families, but he didn't, because of his age, he didn't get to do family before he was distant from them. And his mother's not even human, you know. We might think that's cool, you know, because she's got some power, but that's also a problem, you know, that he doesn't have a human mother. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to reduce Achilles to his circumstances, but I think the contrast is stark between someone who is really remarkably embedded in family simultaneously with war, and one who is sort of remarkably alienated from family and other aspects of culture in war.
But not
That's definitely, yeah, go ahead.
but not alienated from love, right? And ultimately, it's love that motivates him, right? In the same way that it's love that I think is motivating Hector to fight for his side. It's love that eventually helps Achilles overcome his pride, I guess, if I was to use Maximilian language in his description of Socrates. So there is that. It's still love. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, definitely coming off of that. It's that, I think that's what makes him go so crazy when Patroclus dies, because Patroclus is all he has. That's really the only source of companionship and love that he gets. So I think that's part of the reason why he went so like, I'm gonna avenge him and I'm gonna kill Hector. And then he ended up trying to desecrate his body. If I remember correctly, the gods prevented that. Yeah, they made sure that his body stayed like intact because they knew what Achilles at least was doing was wrong.
I think in a similar vein, also, I liked what Professor Thomas was saying about Achilles having only this world, and this is what the world confines him to. And he always sees himself in this double consciousness of how the world sees him. They only see me as this war machine. They only want me to win the war. But I am not that. I am individual. I love someone. And I think that you know, his act with Patroclus, that was his final thrust at telling the world and shouting to the world that I am an individual.
I think there is also, like you said, Angel, there's something like universal about the Achilles experience. Like, I feel like more or less all of us have been at some point an Achilles, like where we think that, you know, we have superpowers over the world and we can do whatever we want. And, you know, the reality humbles us to the point that, you know, we have to contend with reality. And, you know, I think you can think of it as like us growing up or societies growing up, or I think multiple levels of analysis could, you know, this could adhere to multiple levels of analysis. So yeah, like Miriam said, probably all of us see ourselves in Achilles in one way or another.
I think that's an interesting point, especially if you consider, you know, the time that we're living in now, where the world is shut down by like a disease that's, you know, smaller than a cell. So it's like it's humbling, I think. We're pushed into these sort of circumstances where our lives are sort of coming to our normal lives are coming to like a sort of standstill, and we have to create this new way of doing things and way of going about things. And I think that that is really interesting and important that we as humans are adapting like that. I think that is such something that is so universal and something that happens whether, you know, fiction or reality. It's something that, you know, transcends, goes across time, and that whether like, and part of it is definitely love. Like if you have somebody with you and, you know, going through things with you, that definitely pushes you through the things, whether it's love, like in the platonic sense or in the romantic sense or or in the familial sense, any sort of love, no matter what kind of, you know, love you have, that's something that's so important. I think the same thing applies with, you know, Achilles and Patroclus, whether you fall on the side that thinks that, you know, they were romantic lovers or whether they were platonic, it still applies that it still applies that Patroclus was the great love of Achilles' life, and that was what drove him in the war. And I think that that's something that's parallels to what we're doing now with the pandemic, what it is that is getting us through this now. Yeah.
What does it mean to fight for a dead person? I mean, I'm thinking of Maximilian's also again with Antigone. He brought up Antigone a lot, and that, you know, it's a different from Achilles and Patroclus, but it's also, I want to bury my dead brother, and defying the government, defying her uncle Creon in light of that. So yeah, what can we say about that?
I absolutely adored Antigone when I read it. It's one of my favorite. It was what I was considering writing this paper about, but I adore Antigone so much. It's one of the best plays I've ever read. It made me cry like really hard, because I think that I have 3 siblings. I have 3 sisters, and I think that, and for us, in our religion, burial is also very important, and honoring someone in their death. And I think that was something that resonated so strongly with me. And I definitely think that fighting for defying and being willing to give up your life just to give your brother the honor of being buried. There was this line, I've read several translations of this play. One of them, I think, was Anne Carson. I think she wrote something like, "Who can grow me a new brother?" And I was like, that hit me in the gut, like in the heart. And I was just, yeah, that I definitely think that is just so important, like, because, you know, we're living in this time now where you can't see your loved ones pass. If they're dying of COVID-19, you can't go to the hospital, and people have had to watch their loved ones die over like video camera. And that's something that's so deeply sad. And I think that's definitely a connection that you can draw with Antigone. She was unable to be with her brother when he died, but she can bury him. She can take care of his body and make sure that it isn't desecrated by the vultures. And she can go against Creon, and she can fight for her brother, even if her brother is dead. So I think that's definitely something that, like, good connection there. Made me cry.
I wonder if in both cases we're seeing a kind of exploration of the limit of politics too. That there's something about Creon's political power that, you know, we could talk about him, and I think Maximilian did this nicely. You could talk about it being a mistake to do this or that when you have power. But maybe we could even say more than that, that it is a mistake to attempt to wield political power over things like a person's desire to bury their dead, but it's really not politics. It's not the role of politics. There's a limit to the sorts of things that in human life that politics should attempt to control, and that it can control ultimately. I mean, one could say that perhaps in both of these texts, both in the early, maybe all of the Iliad, but certainly the early parts of the Iliad, and then in the sort of crisis of Antigone, that it's just politics is failing. Agamemnon is not controlling Achilles, and Creon is not controlling Antigone. And it's not because, I mean, Agamemnon's not great, but it's not because he's not great, and it's not because Creon's not great. Maybe it's just because that's not what politics can do. Chandler, do you want to jump in? It's like an auction. I see a twitch, and I think that's a thing.
One of the most interesting things that I noted when my class read Antigone and we presented it is I kind of noticed from the beginning of the story, I had a little bit of kind of a sympathy for Creon in the beginning. Obviously, you know, putting aside his later acts, I mean, you can't imagine having, you know, even if we ignore a lot of, you know, the earlier context with Oedipus and everything, he's a man who's kind of just been put in a position of power because there was this kind of civil war, and he wields his power very, you know, poorly in the rest of the story. But you can definitely see how, you know, there's always a controversy in society about, you know, how do you, you know, support what do you do to commemorate or distance yourself from the lost cause of a war? Creon is basically been thrust into this position of power due to this civil war caused by Antigone's brother and this quarrel over power. And so there's definitely this interesting concept where you want a leader to respect different cultural, different religious, and also just basic human rights boundaries. But from the beginning of the story, you can kind of see that Creon has inherited a kingdom or a city state full of problems already, and there's already been this big conflict. And so I definitely distancing from the rest of his activities in the book, as the story goes on, he continues to kind of, it's almost like a very rapid fall into paranoia. And it's very interesting that he gets the power. And I know that we mentioned earlier there's that difference between what do you have to do to get the power and what do you have to do to keep the power. And so he gets the power kind of thrust upon him, and he then desperately tries to cling to the power in a method that I think almost everybody finds relatively objectionable, particularly if we look at it from a modern context. But also, the main character of the story and the titular character is Antigone. So you sympathize with her because you have her scenes where she's talking about why she believes what she believes, and you kind of get a more of an outside look at Creon. And as I've said again, and completely distinct him from a lot of the borderline insane things he did to secure his power. But we've kind of spoke a lot with heroes like Achilles and stuff. There's this deification of prominent figures, and that was one of the things that I find most fascinating is the idea of President of the United States. It's kind of we judge. There's always been this concept in history of the great man, and I think if somebody is upheld as a paragon of good, or even just as the pinnacle of success, you're going to look upon them a lot stricter and kind of a lot more judgmentally than you would an average person. And whether or not we agree with every president that comes and goes, they have achieved a very high level in society and in politics, and they've reached that kind of status. But so one of the things that I found most fascinating is if you're president, you're judged on your own merits, what you do, but you're also kind of judged in a historical retrospective. There's always that kind of you are the 37th president, as I mentioned in my paper with Nixon. Nixon did a lot of things with the Environmental Protection Agency, a lot of things that we would on the surface agree with, but you hear his name and you think Watergate. And so I think that there's always that issue with when you're in power is a reputation is pretty much of paramount importance. And so I think it's even riskier when particularly you have you ascend into a position where you have people who have done such great things prior to you.
I liked what you were saying earlier, Maximilian, about how just sympathizing with Creon to begin with. I think again it's important to see both sides of the story. And yeah, Creon, I think Shakespeare's words is fitting with what you were saying, that heavy is the head that wears the crown, because there's so much that you have to do to hold on to that power. And I mean, I guess my question would be, what is the cost of that? Professor Thomas was saying that politics fails. And I realize that in a lot of these stories and throughout history, that politics always runs into these conflicts with family. Creon, Antigone, their family, he's an uncle, and he's sort of reliant on Antigone to bear an heir to his son and to continue the line. But then his authority is questioned by family, and he has to kill her or do something. I also remember histories in Rome, or I don't remember which book. It might have been like the Annals or something. But a son of a king does something that the king has said has not allowed, and he has to kill his own son for it. And yeah, it's really strange to me that although family is the unit of the Commonwealth, and it is what makes up politics really, politics still does not work with these familial connections. Like somehow they go into conflict because of exactly what Maximilian was talking about, this reputation, this holding on to authority. If the king did not kill his son, it would show very badly on his authority. So he had to kill the son. And in the same way, Creon had to kill Antigone for the same reason. So yeah, politics and family don't go together. But in what other ways does politics fall short? What other ways does it fail? And how do we fix any of those problems?
And I think just to add to that, I'm sorry, Maximilian, if I'm cutting you. But just to add to that, I think, you can, the way I think of family, you can think of it as like your actual like physical relatives, or you can think of it symbolically as, the ideas that you choose and the principles that you stand by. And those could be your family, because I think in the case of Achilles, he was not like blood connected with his friend, but he was pretty much annoyed by his death and revenged the world. So that's how I think of family too, especially in a modern context, like, people have different ideas and things that they believe in and things that they hold dear, and they're willing to die for it and they're willing to defend it. So it gets really complex.
I think politics most blatantly falls short because not everybody is the same. Even if you are a member of one group or one society, or you just hold beliefs that are similar to people around you, you always have your own experience and your own unique twist on it. And so I think that, one of the thing that inspired me to write my paper the way it was is I'd had the prompt and I was desperately trying to think about what I could do. And my brain just made this connection between the Patriot Act and Allegory of the Cave, where, to what they deemed as to safeguard the American people and have that kind of protection, it required such a vast amount of governmental overreach into everyone's lives, almost to the point where it invades an individual's autonomy. And, you'd kind of want to believe that your own thoughts and words are, private, or, there's some kind of sanctity to them. But, it's, I think politics falls, most clearly short is because nobody thinks the same way day in or day out. You can have people who are staunch for one belief, and particularly in politicians. If I link it back to what I was writing about, you have politicians who have staunch beliefs on one topic early in their lives, but whether personal experience or just a gradual social evolution, their minds change on a matter. And so, I think that's one of those big paradoxes where, everybody wants their voice to be heard, but you also kind of want a society that has some amount of safety and stability. And I think that's probably one of these areas where politics fall short, because unless you have probably a very boring and very homogenous society, you need that individual thought.
I think that's so interesting. And this discussion of Creon from before, I thought was really cool, because it also, brought up for me that Machiavellian idea: is it better to be feared than or to be loved as a leader? And I think that, so often leaders, they have to try to strike that balance, and so often they end up falling on this side of to be feared. For Creon, it was by killing his niece, and by leaving his nephew to die, to rot on the battlefield, or rot wherever it was that he was. I don't remember, but I think that's so, like, that side of it, this being feared side of it, is very much big picture, and very much, it's a very large type of like concept. And you talk about all these, you have to worry about how to keep control over all the masses and all these things. And so leaders, I think, get caught up in this very big picture, like actions and consequences for the whole country, or wherever it is that they're leading. And I think that they forget this, loved aspect of it. It doesn't just apply to, being loved by your people. It's love and showing love between your own, like, small group of people that you care about. And I think that, you know, only humans really have that ability to be big and small at the same time. And for me, when I was writing my paper, I could have chosen, writing about this, the big picture of the politics and the conflict between Troy and the Achaeans. But for me, I really wanted to talk about, go down to the individual, because I think that people have such a capacity to be so loving and caring among people they don't even know. And I saw that really held true in this time that we're living in. You have all these crazy things that are happening in politics and all these things, and people not caring about the other, and with like figuring out how to give COVID relief bills and all these things. But I think that people on the small scale giving, donations even when they're struggling, and sharing things with each other, and showing this love on a small scale between everyone. I think that that's really what's getting us through. And for me, that's what I really wanted to write about. Like that's especially in that part at the end where I was talking about Hector, leaving the battlefield for a minute just to have this small moment with his family. And it really resonated with me in this time where, we all need that. We all need those moments where, what is it that's getting us through? The small things. It really is the small things.
I do like that you're focusing on the small and the individual, because that is, I think what is moving us forward, it's this love. But I also wonder, like, what is happening with history, especially in the time of the Iliad? It's this massive war, but this war is also propelled by a kind of love, isn't it? I mean, it was instigated because of Helen being stolen, one's love being stolen. And it sort of occurred to me that, war and love are having this sort of affair. Ares and Aphrodite are having an affair. And yeah, what is happening there?
That's a good thing to bring up. There's definitely there's such a small balance, like such a thin line between war and peace and love and all those things that something as big as a war can be motivated by something as simple as this person being taken from their lover. And I think that the way I read it, a lot of it was propelled by the gods, by their own disputes, because there's this the story of how the three goddesses, Aphrodite and is it Athena and Hera, having this conflict between the three of them about who's the most beautiful, and trying to get Perseus to cut side with one of them or something like that. I don't really remember because it was
Paris there, not Perseus.
Paris. I was like, what's his name? Paris. Yes. Paris. Okay. Yeah. And then him ending up with Helen and taking Helen and all those things. And I thought a lot of it was moved along by the gods' own issues with each other, and they kind of pushed them onto the mortals. And then that's kind of how it happened for me. And I think that that's pretty similar to some of the things that have happened in history, where there was in Europe, a bunch of wars, and the leaders of all those countries were family, somehow related to each other. And, in Britain and France and Germany, they were all somehow related, and there was this thing that was happening. But I think that that's super interesting to bring up, that the fact that something so small can also have such massive ripple effect.
And it's related to what you were saying earlier, that it's weird that humans can at the same time be so small and be so big. And then what you were saying about the gods and the way that they were mirroring actually what is happening in the human realm. Yeah, and it also just makes me think of how hubristic we are. We too try to act like gods. But in the context of history and in light of everything that we're going through right now, it also reminds me, like the gods, we are beholden to something. The gods seem to be beholden to something like fate, right? In that scene where it was Ajax and Hector, and then Zeus said, I don't know what to do. Let us tip the scales and let fate decide, as if they couldn't decide. And there was this higher thing, fate, that was going to decide history. And even though we at this moment, at the same time feel small, at the same time feel like gods, we're beholden to this history that's happening before us.
You guys, I'm actually, because we had 2 papers instead of 3, and this has been just a fantastic conversation. But let me take just a second to tell you about a couple of ways that you can have informal conversations, and so that you don't have to stop chatting with each other about these things or other things if you don't want to. But I think I am going to close down this formal session a little early. I'm still, as you can imagine, dealing with a few details of the conference. I don't want to shut your conversation down, but I need to go help a few other people get involved. But there are a couple of ways. Socio has, normal sort of chat functions that kind of are like social media. It is a little confusing. Each of you has a panelist profile and a user profile. That was a limit of the software that I just couldn't do anything about. But to find each other, to find email addresses or send each other messages, you want to pay attention to the user profile. To find out where people are presenting, that's where you look under the panelist profile. So that's one thing that you can do. That's obviously not ideal, but it is a way you can connect with each other. Another is a bit experimental, but it might be a better way to have conversations. If you go back to the main page in Socio where you found the agenda on the left-hand side of the screen, one of those options is called Mingle. And if you go to that, you do have to accept some permissions and to get to it, but you get into a space. It's a program called Wonder. That doesn't matter, but it's a sort of a virtual room with virtual tables. I've put some names on there, but they're really more suited to the faculty conference than the student conference. But if you show up in that, if you go to the Mingle and you accept the cookies or download whatever they want you to, it's not much, then your face becomes a little icon that you can move around that room. And when you get into an area or a table, I don't know, if anyone else is in that table with you, it opens into a chat. And so it's just a place that you can go and find other people and have a video chat rather than just, and you can sort of mingle. That's kind of the idea. So I'm so happy. I enjoyed this session so much. I feel lucky that I had a chance to be a part of it, and I really look forward to having more conversations with you guys in the next day or so. So, but I do need to shut down this room. So thank you to Maximilian. Thank you to Miriam. Thanks to all of the great conversations, and I'll see you guys again, maybe in half an hour. I don't know. Bye. Miriam, I can let you, do you want to end it? I'll leave and you end it. Does that sound good?
Yes, I'm trying to get my video up. Do rest assured I'm here.
Yes, no. I don't need proof of that, but I do want to give you the practice. So I'm just going to leave the meeting and then you can, unless you're supposed to, are you chairing another panel in the next session?
Yeah, I'm chairing maybe this panel again. I'm chairing the B panel next session, but I think I will leave and then come back in.
Well, what you can, if you want to leave and come back in, that's fine. But if you want to just shut down, I'll leave. You'll be the only one here. You can just shut down unless you have another thing to do on Zoom, we can just stop the recording. In fact, let me do that now.